By the time I stepped into my backyard that morning, half of my fence was lying in the grass like someone had torn it out in the middle of the night. But it was not a storm. It was my neighbor, Martin Keller. He stood there in polished shoes, red-faced and furious, while 3 contractors poured gravel into wooden forms that cut across the back corner of my property. A cement mixer growled behind them. My flower bed was crushed. 1 fence post had been tossed beside my shed, splintered at the base, with fresh dirt still stuck to it. I told them to stop. Martin spun around and pointed straight at my face. He yelled that the HOA had approved everything, that the strip of land was useless, and that I was making a fool of myself over a few feet of dirt. Then he kicked one of my fence boards across the lawn. The contractor looked uncomfortable, but he kept working. Martin waved a folded paper in the air, like it was a court order, even though I could see it was only an HOA approval, no county stamp, no permit number, no survey attached. He told me to call the sheriff, the county, or a lawyer if I wanted. By the time anyone showed up, he said, the concrete would be dry, and I would be stuck looking at his patio forever. But Martin did not know the stake he had pulled out marked a recorded drainage easement, and the old fence was not the property line. 3 weeks later, code enforcement would tape a violation notice across that patio. The county would order part of it demolished. The HOA would withdraw its approval in a public meeting, and Martin would learn that those few feet of land were never his to take. Before Martin Keller turned my backyard into a construction site. I was not the kind of person who argued with neighbors. I kept to myself. I waved when people walked their dogs. I paid my HOA dues on time. I mowed my lawn before the grass got tall enough for someone to complain. I read the neighborhood emails, followed the trash schedule, trimmed the shrubs, and tried to live the kind of quiet life that did not give anyone a reason to knock on my door. That house was not a mansion. It was a modest single-story home at the edge of a suburban HOA community, with beige siding, a narrow driveway, and a backyard that looked ordinary to anyone passing by. But to me, it meant years of overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and every dollar I had managed to save after starting over. When I bought it, I remember standing in that backyard with the keys still cold in my hand, thinking that for the first time in my adult life, no landlord could raise the rent. No upstairs neighbor could stomp over my ceiling, and no one could tell me I had 30 days to leave. That little patch of grass felt like peace. It felt like proof that all the long weeks and hard choices had finally turned into something solid. The back corner of the yard was my favorite part, even though it was not fancy. There was an old wooden fence, a small flower bed, and a low strip of land behind the fence that helped carry rainwater away during storms. Most people would not have noticed it. Martin certainly acted like it was worthless. But when I closed on the house, the survey showed that strip belonged to my lot. The fence had been built slightly inside the property line, not directly on it, leaving room for drainage and maintenance. I kept that survey in a folder with my deed, closing papers, insurance documents, and HOA covenants. I was not obsessed with legal paperwork. I just believed that when you buy a home, you should know exactly what you own. Martin lived directly behind me in a larger house with a raised deck, fresh landscaping, and outdoor lights bright enough to make his backyard look like a restaurant patio. He liked things polished. Perfect lawn, perfect grill, perfect parties. Every summer weekend, his guests spilled onto his deck with drinks in their hands while music drifted over the fence. At first, I did not mind him. He was loud, but not openly hostile. Then one afternoon, he leaned over the fence and asked if I had ever thought about cleaning up that back strip of land. He said it made the view awkward from his side. A few weeks later, he asked if I would consider selling him a few feet so he could make his patio flow better. I laughed politely because I thought he was joking. He was not when I told him I was not interested. His smile disappeared just long enough for me to notice. After that, the complaints started. The HOA sent me a warning about my fence looking weathered, then another about my shrubs being uneven, then one about visual clutter in the rear yard, even though the only things back there were a garden chair, a planter box, and a rake leaning against the shed. It felt small at first, annoying but survivable. I told myself every HOA had people who liked to complain. I told myself Martin would eventually move on to some other project. But if you have ever had a neighbor who thinks your property is just unused space waiting for them to claim it, you already know how this kind of thing starts. It begins with comments, then suggestions, then pressure, and if you do not push back, one day you wake up to the sound of machinery behind your fence. That Saturday morning, when the cement mixer started growling before I had even finished my coffee, I still thought there had to be a misunderstanding. Then I looked out the kitchen window and saw my fence coming down. At first, I thought the workers were repairing something behind Martin's fence. That was the only explanation that made sense in my half-awake mind. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee cooling in my hand, watching men carry boards, bags of gravel, and metal stakes across the grass. The sound of machinery echoed between the houses, too loud for a quiet Saturday morning, but I still told myself it had nothing to do with me. Then one of the workers lifted a panel from my fence and laid it flat on my lawn. That was when my stomach dropped. I went outside, through the back door, still wearing the old sweatshirt I used for yard work, and crossed the grass as fast as I could. The closer I got, the worse it looked. 2 fence panels had already been removed. The flower bed along the back corner had been trampled into the dirt. The orange marking paint cut across the ground in a shape that did not follow my fence, my yard, or any property line I had ever seen. Martin stood on the other side with his hands on his hips, looking less like a neighbor and more like a man supervising the takeover of someone else's land. The contractors had built wooden forms for a concrete patio extension. Those forms pushed several feet past where Martin's yard ended and into the low strip behind my fence. A pallet of pavers sat partly on my grass. A wheelbarrow had left muddy tracks from the side gate to the back corner. My old fence posts, which had stood there since before I bought the house, had been pulled out and tossed aside like trash. I asked what they were doing, and Martin acted annoyed that I even needed an answer. That he said the HOA Architectural Committee had approved his backyard improvement. He said the old fence was ugly, the back strip was dead space, and the entire area needed to be cleaned up for the good of the neighborhood. He described it like he was doing everyone a favor, as if destroying my fence and crossing onto my lot was some kind of community service. When I told him that was my property, his expression hardened. He said I was confused. He said the land behind the fence was common area. He said his contractor had already measured. He said the board knew about it. Then he unfolded a paper and held it up from across the torn gap in the fence, making sure the workers and a few curious neighbors could see it. It was an HOA approval form, but even from where I stood, I could tell it was not a building permit. There was no county stamp, no permit number, no engineering review, and no survey attached to it. Still, Martin waved it like it gave him the right to redraw my lot. The contractor avoided my eyes. He kept adjusting the wooden forms while Martin did all the talking. Gravel spilled into the corner where my flowers had been. One worker stepped over a broken fence rail and dragged a hose across my lawn. The entire scene felt unreal, like I had opened my back door and walked into a decision everyone had made about my property without inviting me into the room. I told them again that they needed to stop until the property line was verified. Martin laughed, but there was nothing friendly in it. He told me that if I wanted to waste money on lawyers, that was my choice. He said projects like this got approved every week, and homeowners like me always backed down once they understood how expensive a dispute could become. He made it clear that he believed I did not have the money, the patience, or the knowledge to challenge him. Then he said the part that stayed with me. He said that by the time I figured out who to complain to, the concrete would already be poured, and he was almost right. Within an hour, the gravel base was spread. By noon, the first load of concrete had arrived. I stood near my back steps, recording with my phone while they poured a slab that connected Martin's yard to a corner of land I knew he did not own. He had planned more than a simple patio. There were markings for a low retaining wall, an outdoor kitchen, and a fire pit area with built-in seating. It was designed to turn that disputed strip into the most expensive part of his backyard. The damage kept getting worse. The weight of the equipment left ruts in my grass. A small row of plants I had put in the previous spring was crushed under boots and boards. A section of my fence rail cracked when one of the workers stacked lumber against it. Nobody asked permission. Nobody offered to fix anything. Every time I tried to speak, Martin stepped between me and the crew, acting as if he had the authority to dismiss me from my own yard. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from the HOA. It said Martin S. Patio expansion had been approved by the Architectural Committee, and that my interference with approved community improvements could result in a violation notice. The message reminded me that all exterior disputes should be handled respectfully, and that homeowners were expected to support neighborhood beautification. I read that email 3 times, standing in my kitchen with the sound of construction still shaking through the wall. That was the moment the anger changed into something colder, because Martin had not just crossed a property line. He had used the HOA like a shield. He had taken a weak approval form, turned it into a weapon, and counted on me being too intimidated to question it. By evening, the concrete was wet, the fence was broken, and Martin was standing on the new slab with a satisfied look on his face. A few of his friends came over, and I heard him bragging about how much bigger the backyard looked. Now that the wasted corner had finally been opened up, I did not yell back. I did not step onto the slab. I did not touch a single board, stone, or tool. I went inside, locked the back door, and pulled out the folder from the day I bought the house. If Martin wanted to treat a few feet of my land like it was nothing, then I needed to find the one thing he could not laugh off: the paperwork that proved exactly where his property ended. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Martin standing on that wet concrete like he had just won something. I saw my fence boards in the grass, my crushed flowers, the muddy tracks across my lawn, and that folded HOA approval paper he had waved at me like it was stronger than my deed. But anger was not going to move that patio. A tantrum would only make me look unstable. Touching his construction materials would give him something to use against me. Yelling at the workers would turn the story into a neighborhood argument instead of a property dispute. So I made a decision before sunrise. The next morning, I was not going to fight Martin with volume. I was going to fight him with records. The first thing I did was save everything. I took photos of the broken fence from every angle. I photographed the missing posts, the crushed flower bed, the tire marks in the grass, the concrete forms, the gravel base, the fresh slab, and the line where Martin's new patio pushed past my old fence. I did not just take one wide shot and hope it was enough. I took close-ups. I took distance shots. I took photos from my back door, from the side yard, and from the corner of the shed so the location would be clear. Then I checked my security camera. That little camera had been mounted under the back eave for almost 2 years, mostly to watch for package thieves and raccoons. I had never imagined it would become the most important witness in a property fight. The footage showed the workers arriving early. It showed Martin walking them to the back corner. It showed him pointing toward my fence. It showed the fence panels coming down before I ever stepped outside. More importantly, it showed one moment that made me sit perfectly still at my kitchen table. Before the contractors started digging, Martin walked to the old wooden stake near the rear corner, bent down, pulled it from the soil, and tossed it toward his side of the yard. It was quick, almost casual, like he thought nobody would ever notice. But the camera noticed. The timestamp noticed, and now I had it saved in 3 different places. After that, I opened the folder from my closing day. Inside were papers I had barely looked at since buying the house. My deed, the plat map, the title documents, the HOA covenants, and the old survey. I spread them across the dining table and started comparing the lines to what had just been built behind my house. The survey showed something I remembered, but had never truly appreciated until that moment. My fence was not sitting on the property line. It was inside my property by several feet, leaving a narrow strip behind it for drainage access and maintenance. That meant Martin had not simply built up to the fence. He had crossed beyond it. I marked the survey with sticky notes and compared it to photos from the yard. Then I went online to the County Property Records website and searched both addresses. I downloaded the parcel map. I checked the recorded subdivision plat. I looked for easements, restrictions, and any document tied to drainage along the rear lots. That was when the first real crack appeared in Martin S.'s story. The county records showed a drainage easement running along that back strip. It was not HOA common area. It was not abandoned land. It was not some vague leftover space for Martin to absorb into his backyard because it made his patio look better. It was part of my lot, and it carried a recorded restriction about stormwater flow. Next, I searched the county permit portal. Martin had made it sound like every authority had already approved his project. But the permit database told a different story. There was no building permit for a concrete patio expansion, no permit for a retaining wall, no permit for an outdoor kitchen, no grading approval, no stormwater review. The only thing I could find was a small HOA architectural approval listed in an email attachment, and that approval had no power to change county rules or property ownership. I printed everything: the survey, the deed page, the parcel map, the easement record, the HOA email threatening me with a violation, screenshots from the permit search, still frames from the camera footage. I put each page in order by date and wrote notes in the margins, not emotional notes, not insults, just facts: time, location, damage, who was present, what was said, what was built. Then I read the HOA covenants more carefully than I ever had before. Buried in the architectural section was the sentence that mattered. HOA approval did not eliminate the homeowner's responsibility to obtain county permits, comply with setback rules, respect easements, and avoid building on property they did not own. In other words, the board could approve paint colors, landscaping designs, and patio plans, but it could not give Martin permission to take my land. Still, I knew an old survey might not be enough by itself. Martin would claim it was outdated. The HOA would call it a misunderstanding. The contractor would say he only followed the owner's instructions, so I hired a licensed surveyor. 2 days later, he arrived with equipment, maps, and the calm expression of a man who had seen too many neighbors fight over inches. He found the original markers, checked the county records, measured the rear line, and placed bright orange stakes where the boundary actually ran. The result was worse for Martin than I expected. The new patio crossed the property line by several feet at the corner. Part of the slab sat on my land. Part of the retaining wall cut into the recorded drainage easement, and the planned outdoor kitchen area appeared to violate the setback requirements before it was even finished. I stood there looking at those orange stakes, and for the first time since the fence came down, I felt the ground steady under me again. Martin still had concrete, but I had the survey, the camera footage, the county records, the HOA rules, and proof that the line he thought he could erase had been there all along. The orange survey stakes changed everything, but I still knew Martin would not accept them quietly. A man like Martin did not build half a patio on someone else's land because he respected boundaries. He built it because he believed boundaries were only real when someone powerful enforced them. And up to that point, he still thought the HOA was powerful enough to protect him. So I did the one thing he never expected. I sent everyone the same packet. Martin got it. The HOA board got it, the architectural committee got it, the contractor got it. I attached the new survey, the old closing survey, the county parcel map, screenshots from the permit portal, photos of the damaged fence, and still frames from my security camera. I kept the email short and calm. I did not insult him. I did not threaten him. I simply stated that the patio appeared to cross my property line, interfere with a recorded drainage easement, and lack the required county permits. For 3 hours, nobody replied. Then Martin called me 8 times in a row. I did not answer. I wanted everything in writing. By that afternoon, his first email came in. It was exactly what I expected. He said my surveyor was wrong. He said the HOA had already approved the project. He said the strip behind my fence had always been treated like common area. He said I was harassing him and trying to ruin a simple backyard improvement because I was jealous. But he made one mistake in that email. He wrote that the contractor had built exactly where Martin told him to build, based on the lot line Martin had personally identified. I read that sentence twice, then printed it. The next morning, the county clerk's office sent me the certified easement documents. That was the moment the dispute stopped being about a neighbor's bad attitude and became something much bigger. The recorded plat showed a drainage easement running along the rear portion of our lots. The land itself belonged to the individual homeowners, but no owner was allowed to place a fixed structure inside that easement without county approval. No slab, no retaining wall. no outdoor kitchen, no grading change that blocked the flow of stormwater. Martin's patio did all of that. It crossed onto my property. It covered part of the drainage easement. It changed the slope of the ground. And because his retaining wall sat near the rear boundary, it also appeared to violate the setback requirement for permanent structures. The county permit portal confirmed the second half of the problem. There was no permit for the slab, no permit for the retaining wall, no permit for electrical work. For the outdoor kitchen he had already marked out, no stormwater review. Martin had taken one HOA architectural approval and treated it like a magic shield against every other rule. Then I reviewed the camera footage again. That was when I found the clip that made my hands go cold. The morning construction began. Before I came outside, Martin walked to the corner behind my fence and pulled up a small wooden stake. He looked over his shoulder first. Then he bent down, twisted it free, and tossed it into his own yard. A few seconds later, he pointed to that exact area and told the contractor where to place the forms. The camera caught his voice, too. It was faint, but clear enough, he said. "Take that extra strip. She never uses it." That sentence changed the entire tone of the case. It was no longer just a mistake. It was not confusion over an old fence. It was not a harmless misunderstanding caused by bad measurements. It showed that Martin knew there was an extra strip of land beyond the fence, knew I used the fence as a visual boundary, and decided to take advantage of that. I sent the footage, the survey, and the easement records to a local real estate attorney. By the end of the week, Martin received a demand letter. It required him to stop using the patio, remove all structures placed on my land, restore the drainage easement, repair my fence, replace the damaged landscaping, reimburse the survey cost, and preserve all communication with the contractor and HOA. The letter also warned that continued use of my property could lead to claims for trespass, property damage, nuisance, and injunctive relief. Martin's tone changed almost immediately. The man who had laughed at me across broken fence boards now wanted to talk like neighbors, he said. Attorneys made everything worse. He said the patio was already finished and tearing it out would be wasteful. He offered to plant shrubs along the edge, as if a row of bushes could fix a recorded property violation. When I refused to discuss anything by phone, he tried another strategy. He blamed the HOA. He copied the board on a long email, claiming they had approved his plan and should stand behind him. That the HOA's attorney must have read the covenants faster than Martin did because their response was careful, cold, and completely different from the warning they had sent me days earlier. They said architectural approval did not authorize construction on another owner's property, did not waive county permit requirements, and did not override easement restrictions. For the first time, Martin was alone. His contractor stopped showing up. The HOA stopped defending him. The architectural committee stopped answering his messages. And the patio he had bragged about all weekend suddenly looked less like an upgrade and more like evidence poured in concrete. Then the first heavy storm rolled in. Rain hammered the neighborhood for nearly an hour. Water rushed along the rear yards like it always had, except this time it hit Martin's retaining wall and backed up toward my fence line. By morning, the back corner of my yard was soaked, muddy and sinking. The drainage path had been blocked exactly where the easement said nothing was supposed to be built. I took photos before the sun was fully up. Then I sent everything to code enforcement and the county stormwater department. Martin had spent weeks telling me a few feet of dirt did not matter. Now those few feet were about to become an official county violation. The code enforcement did not treat my complaint like a neighborhood argument. They treated it like a property record problem, a permit problem, and a stormwater problem, all stacked on top of each other. 2 days after I sent the photos, the survey, the easement documents, and the video from my security camera, a county inspector pulled up in front of my house. He did not arrive with anger or drama. He arrived with a clipboard, a measuring wheel, a tablet, and the kind of calm expression that made Martin's confidence look suddenly fragile. Martin came outside almost immediately. He had the same stiff shoulders and irritated face, but this time, he was not yelling across a broken fence at me. He was standing in front of a county official who had no interest in HOA gossip, backyard pride, or who had hosted the better summer parties. The inspector walked the rear line, checked the orange survey stakes, compared them with the recorded plat, and took photos of the slab, the retaining wall, the damaged drainage path, and the section where the concrete crossed onto my land. Martin tried to frame everything as a misunderstanding caused by an old fence. He kept pointing toward the HOA approval, as if repeating that document enough times would make it stronger. But the inspector kept returning to the same facts. HOA approval did not replace a county permit. HOA approval did not move a property line. HOA approval did not erase a recorded drainage easement. For the first time since this began, Martin had no audience he could impress. The inspector checked the county permit database from his tablet right there in the yard. Then he measured the setback from the rear boundary. Then he photographed the retaining wall sitting where the easement was supposed to remain open. The longer he worked, the quieter Martin became. The man who had once promised me the concrete would be dry before I could do anything now stood beside that same concrete while the county documented it as a violation. By the end of the visit, a notice was taped to the patio. The project could not be used, expanded, covered, finished, or connected to utilities until Martin submitted proper documents and resolved the property and easement issues. The outdoor kitchen framing had to stop. The retaining wall had to be reviewed. The portion of the slab inside the disputed area had to remain untouched until the county and the property owners reached a lawful resolution. The contractor was contacted next. He had to provide his license information, the contract, the drawings, and any proof that he had verified the property line before building. That part mattered because the footage showed Martin directing the work. But the contractor had still continued after I objected on site. Suddenly, everyone who had ignored me on construction day had to answer questions in writing. Martin did not handle it well. He started moving chairs back onto the patio that evening, like using it would prove ownership. When I photographed it from my side of the yard, he walked toward the gap in the fence and tried to pull the temporary barrier aside. That was when I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. The deputy who arrived did not pretend to settle a civil property dispute on the spot. He made that clear. But he also looked at the survey stakes, the county notice, the demand letter, and the footage summary. After speaking with both of us, he documented that Martin had been warned not to cross onto my property, not to disturb the marked boundary, and not to interfere with the County S posted notice. That report became one more page in the file. The biggest shift happened at the next HOA meeting. Martin walked in expecting support from the same board that had sent me a warning about interfering with his approved improvement. But by then, the HOA attorney had reviewed the documents. The board was suddenly careful. The architectural committee no longer described the patio as an approved community improvement. Instead, they called it an owner-submitted project based on information Martin had provided. Residents started asking questions. They wanted to know how the board had approved construction near a property line without requiring a current survey. They wanted to know whether HOA approval could expose other homeowners to lawsuits. They wanted to know why I had been threatened with a violation when the project did not even have county permits. Martin sat in the front row with his arms crossed, but the anger had drained out of him. Every fact that had once sounded like my complaint was now being repeated as part of an official record. The survey, the easement, the missing permits, the blocked drainage, the video of him removing the stake, the damage to my fence and landscaping. The HOA withdrew its warning against me before the meeting ended. Then they suspended their approval of Martin's patio until he could prove legal compliance with county code, property boundaries, easement restrictions, and permit requirements. It sounded polite in the minutes, but everyone in that room understood what it meant. Martin had lost the shield he had been hiding behind, and once the HOA stepped back, the County S order became the only thing left standing between him and a very expensive demolition. The demolition started on a Monday morning. This time, the sound behind my house was different. There was no confidence in it, no bragging, no music drifting over the fence. No Martin standing there with his arms crossed like he owned the whole block. There was only the sharp crack of concrete being cut, the scrape of shovels, then the low rumble of a crew removing the patio he had once promised I would be forced to look at forever. The county order required Martin to remove every part of the slab that crossed onto my land and every structure interfering with the drainage easement. The retaining wall came out first. Then the edge of the patio was cut back. Gravel was hauled away. The outdoor kitchen lines were abandoned before they were ever finished. The area had to be regraded so stormwater could flow the way the recorded easement required. Martin paid for the demolition. He paid to restore the damaged grass. He paid to replace my crushed plants. He reimbursed the survey cost, and part of my attorney's fee through a settlement neither of us pretended was friendly. His insurance handled a portion of the property damage, but not the cost of his bad judgment. The contractor received a formal warning from the county and had to submit records showing how the work had been approved and who had identified the build area. After that, I never saw his truck on our street again. The HOA tried to make its apology sound administrative, but it was still an apology. They withdrew the violation threat against me, admitted their architectural approval had been based on incomplete information, and changed the rules so any project within 10 feet of a property line required a current survey before approval. At the next public meeting, Martin sat in the back row and said almost nothing. That was the strangest part. The man who had yelled in my yard, kicked my fence board, and told me a few feet of dirt did not matter, was suddenly very quiet once every word had to compete with documents, permits, surveys, and county records. When the work was finished, I rebuilt my fence in the right place. Not where Martin wanted it, not where the HOA assumed it belonged, exactly where the survey said it belonged. I planted new flowers along the repaired corner, added one more camera facing the rear line, and kept the orange survey photos in the same folder as my deed. I did not win because I yelled louder. I did not win because I scared anyone. I won because I stayed calm long enough to prove the truth. And if you have ever had someone treat your property like unused space, they were entitled to take. Remember this: a boundary does not become meaningless just because someone else ignores it. Keep your records, save your footage, read the rules, and when someone tries to erase your line, make sure the law can still see it clearly. Share your thoughts in the comments if you have ever dealt with a neighbor, HOA, or contractor who thought they could push past your property rights. Then subscribe for more stories where patience, paperwork, and the truth hit harder than any shouting match ever could.